हरि ओम. Prashnopanishad. Prashna query 3, mantra 7, number 7. अथैकयोऽर्थो उदानः पुण्येन पुण्यं लोकं नयति पापेन पापमुपाभ्यां मनुष्यलोकम्. Again, through one special now, the Udana ascending leads us upward to the virtuous world by good work and carries us to the lower worlds by sinful acts and takes us to the world of men when sin and virtue are mixed. Udana is the last of the officers appointed by the ego in order to a special function for body politic, and this department is located in one of the nadis called in the Yoga Shastra as Sushumna. Sushumna. Since Vedantic literature is not very much concerned with this method of developing the human personality, here the Rishi is not expounding the theory completely, but he only mentions that the Udana goes up through one special nerve. The function of the Udana in the government of the body is something like that of the minister for transport. It is the Udana that provides the fuel or the motive force for the subtle body to move out of the physical structure at the moment of its death towards its next field of activity. We had earlier discussed how the Udana conducts the ego, and we need not go into it again here. However, the mind with intellect, when once divorced from the physical body, that is released from its cage, becomes free to move anywhere it pleases. For example, we sitting here in our seats can send our thoughts to our homes or to any distant place which we have known before. As soon as we think of a place, our thoughts, as it were, reach those points. But unfortunately, we remain here because thoughts get completely released from the body. Since they have no gross weight, they must reach that which they happen to think about. Thus, at the time of death, as a perfect resultant of all the different kinds of thoughts and motives that we have been entertaining during the past, our mind thinks of a fit world, and it being nothing but a flock of swift winged thoughts, it reaches that arena. The motive force by which the thought thus reaches its object of thinking is provided by the Udan power in us. It cannot be any exaggeration if we understand it properly. To say that the Udana is the cultural resultant gained during our mental life. If our thoughts all through our life were low and gross, propelled by animal instincts, selfish wishes, and low motives, certainly the resultant would be a pull on the mind to move towards such an animal life. And the Shastra says that it is the Udana that will then lead us to the lower realms of the animal life desired by us. If, on the other hand, our thoughts were higher and nobler, the consequent the consequent greatness of culture in us would be, as it were, pulling us towards the higher planes of greater evolutionary status and existence. If one, from boyhood onwards, had been meditating upon criminality, then for all the tuition and education the father may squander on him, he cannot become an honest and cultured citizen. He, by his thoughts, has chalked out for himself a successful career as a gaul bird. Man has been given the license to make or to unmake himself. This is the glory that has come to us because we have been provided with the power of discrimination, which neither the animal nor the plant life has got. The lions must necessarily kill the deer because to kill it is an instinct with them. A tree must unconsciously shelter everyone under its branches, not because it is very hospitable, but because it is incapable of doing anything other than what it has been appointed to do. In those lower states of existence, life seems to be governed by only the self preservation instinct. But coming to the status of man, as he has been provided with the power of discrimination, he is no more a victim of his instincts, but he can, if he wants, rise above the low animal tendencies and come to claim a perfect mastery over himself. But if a man has thus got this special privilege, it is accompanied by some special duties also. Thus, his life is not to be lived merely according to the principle of self preservation, but he must build his life upon the principle of preserving the self. Here it is said, the Udan takes the ego center wrapped up in the subtle body to the higher worlds of a greater happiness or to the lower worlds of a graver sorrow according to the balance sheet declared by the mind and intellect at the time of its quitting its present physical body. When the tendencies are almost equal and opposite, and before therefore the balance almost nil, the individual is given another lease of life in the very world as a human being to make or unmake himself. This principle governing the law of reincarnation has been just hinted at here because an exhaustive taste upon it was not necessary in those days when the teacher taught the students who were already well versed in the preliminaries. Mantra number 8. आदित्यो ह वै बाह्यः प्राण उदयत्येष्ट येनं चाक्षुषं प्राणमनुगृह्णानः पृथिव्यां या देवता सैषा पुरुषस्यापानमवष्टभ्यान्तरा यदाकाशभ्यन्तरा यदाकाशसमानो वायुर्व्यानः. The sun is verily the cosmic prad in the eye. The goddess of earth attracts or controls the apan towards her. The space between the earth attracts or controls the apana towards her. The space between the earth and the sun is the samana. The wind is the van. We have already noticed in an earlier discussion in explaining the Vaishwanara that the individual himself projected and magnified is the total, the microcosm Vyashti is the macrocosm Samashti. As such, there must be in the outer world of totality points representing our own inner personalities and the activities within us. Here in this Brahmana, Vipalada suggests points in the cosmos where we can see the same pranic forces that are functioning in us enlarged and extended. Herein we have a typical example of an upasana, a technique of self-integration which was very much prevalent in the Vedic period. Upasana is a method by which we seek to see an idea with a greater message in an ideal which is comparatively gross and seemingly insignificant. Subjectively, the Rishis have indicated to us the various centers of activities within our structure in terms of the five pranic headquarters. In the outer world, we know the various objects of the phenomenal world, and yet, until we are instructed, we do not see in the outer world a replica of our own inner existence. To indicate to the students this relationship between the inner and the outer world, and to train seekers to discover for themselves the inner world splashed out on the map of the total cosmic form, a method of upasana is advocated by the rishis and pursued liberally by all spiritual aspirants of that era. In fact, the word bhakti is never used in the entire literature of the Vedas, and yet the glory of Vyasa is that through his pranas he has rewritten for us the technique of upasana in the language of bhakti on the leaves of our love emotions with tears of joy flowing from our own hearts. Upasana or bhakti is an unavoidable staff in the hands of every seeker, trekking the path of truth to the pinnacle of self experience. As such, we find that, however short an Upanishad may be, more than a third of its contents is spent in advising some methods of upasana. The idea seems to be, as it suggests to every intelligent reader, that even while one has come to the higher stage of philosophic contemplation and samadhi practices, one cannot afford to leave off upasana totally. Your grandfather, even at the ripe age of 72, daily sharpened his 26-year-old faithful razor before shaving. He was very wise. To keep the mind and intellect trim and steady, Upasana is the method, and however established, one may be in truth consciousness, conscious abhyas of one type or another cannot be totally avoided. Those who cry down this truth are only educated illiterates in Vedic parlance. Veda being the science of self perfection, a mere study of it makes up only a learned fool. In Prashnopanishad, we find that Pippalada has punctuated his philosophical discourses in more than four different places to advise us on one method of upasana or the other. This attempt to discover the individual in the total, in Vedanta, the me, in thee, in bhakti, is a process by which our own mind and intellect are chained and shackled with its own planes of the vaster and more extensive fields of the universe. Thereby, the mind becomes expanded, and in this process, the dirt and mud in its drop off just as cotton is cleaned by carding it. Only such a purified mind, capable of expanding beyond ordinary capacities, can renounce its gross density and thus soar higher into the greater heights of God vision and self experience. Here we are told that the prana is verily the sun. This had already been discussed in the first chapter, where Rishi Pippalada explained that the total mind or the total mind or the creator himself became the prana energy and dry matter. He explained that the sun is the prana while discoursing upon those Brahmanas. We had exhausted this topic, but here we have added information for purposes of easier meditation. We are told that the prana functioning in the ear, eye, and mouth, with its headquarters located in the head, is the sun in the outer world. The point of comparison, comparison, comparison between the two, comparison between the two, being that the sun reigns in the crown of the world and the pran is located in the topmost point in an individual's physical structure. Again, the prana functions in the eye, and we have already seen how the sun is the as the source of all light is the presiding deity of the instrument of vision, the eye. The apana, which functions in the pelvic region of the body, has necessarily an activity tending downwards, pushing down things and ejecting them from the body. It is the power that functions behind excretion and insemination. Thus, the direction of its flow is certainly downwards. The apana vritti in the cosmic form cannot be better represented than in the gravitational pull by which everything on the globe is attracted towards its own center. In the language of the Rishi, it is not said that the earth attracts, but the goddess of earth attracts. It is certainly revealing how these antiquated prehistoric Vedic rishis, living their life of strange renunciation and with seemingly no scientific attitude, barbarous in every respect, eating with hands and wearing no shoes, not even educated in holding the fork and knife correctly, could express the truth that Newton discovered when an apple fell on his nose and make him think. As students of modern science, nay, as great devotees in the temple of science, should we not better accept Pippalada to be a modern saint who must have come into the world to declare the Prashnopanishad only after the time of Newton, when gravitational force had already become a theme in our textbooks in India? We must do something about this, or else we will have to swallow the insufferable truth that our Rishi knew in prehistoric times what Newton discovered only a few centuries ago. This and a host of other similar scientific statements are hinted at all over the scriptures. Either we have to declare that the Upanishads are modern books compiled in, say, 1954 and that we are studying the first edition, or perhaps, to be more authentic, we have to post date and declare that the Upanishads belong to, say, AD 1999. All these paradoxes arise because we are not ready to accept the obvious fact that Vedanta had emerged as a philosophy of life when the Hindu generation of the Vedic period had exhausted themselves in their scientific inquiry and discoveries. At the farthest end of the laboratory in the arch of wisdom through which the Vedantists walked out to reach the field of true religion and eternal philosophy. In this sense, a true Vedantist will not condemn or look down upon the developments of the material sciences, but at the same time, it is also true that he will not allow his grey matter to fume up into smoky confusions because of undue excitement at the discoveries of science. After the above advice to the student to identify the prana in him with the sun in the cosmic form and the apana with the gravitational force in the phenomenal world, the Rishi explains that the samana in us is represented in the outer world, in the cosmic atmosphere that lies between the sun and the earth. Just as in us the samana maintains the nutrition and healthy life of all the cells in the body, we know that it is atmospheric air that affords life in all created beings. If the atmosphere is samana, then the vana in us can be fully identified with the wind in the outer world. This method of upasana is not only beneficial to the seeker in expanding himself and becoming subtler, but even to the library student of the Upanishads. It gives a vivid and clear classroom map describing completely and providing fully an objective representation of this highly subjective theme. The earth, the sun, the atmosphere, and the wind together gives us the picture of the relative position and functions of the prana, apana, Samana, and Vana in us. Mantra number 9. तेजो ह वै उदानस्तस्मादुपशान्ततेजाः पुनर्भवमिन्द्रियैर्मनसि सम्पद्यमानैः. The external fire indeed is Udana, therefore he is whom the flames are gone out enters another body, with the senses absorbed in the mind. In the above description, the fifth Upaprana was not explained at all. This Brahman is dedicated to the explanation of the place of the Udana in the outer world Udana, as we have seen in that energy which supplies the motive power for an ego center with its subtle body to move out from one physical structure to another at the time of its death in the existing physical form. Nothing in the outer world could have explained this function of Udana so well as the example given by the Rishi, namely fire. Fire is invoked on different occasions by different means, and no two flames look the same, since the manifested fire depends for its form and intensity upon the fuel that is used. So long as the fuel is supplied, the fire at the given spot has a manifested shape and it can be employed in serving the purposes of the world. But when the fuel is burnt and the fire finds no more material for it to consume, it passes from its manifested condition into its unmanifested stage. Similarly, when a subtle body finds that it has no more experiences to gather in a given physical form, that subtle form throws away its physical structure and departs. With reference to the body, this condition after its divorce from the subtle body is called the death of the body. But the ego center, though not manifest and functioning through the body, exists in its subtle form. The subtle ego center, set in the subtle body, is conveyed to its next field of activity, Loka, by the energy called the Udana. The brilliant subjective scientists of the Vedic period alone could discover such a fitting representation of the Udana in the cosmic chessboard of universal existence. With his senses absorbed in the mind, at the time of death, it is universally observed that the dying man slowly and steadily loses all his sense activities and capacities. He no more sees, hears, smells, tastes, or feels. This is not because these instruments of cognition have become defective, but the power or strength of perception, meaning the pranic vitality in the sense organs, has withdrawn from these sense organ centers. We have been already told that the chief prana, the shadow of the Atman, the ego center, has himself appointed different upapranas to execute their respective duties in the different centers of the body. When the ego center with the subtle body is preparing to quit the physical body, he gathers all his different assistants before making his exit. When the visitor has gathered his coat, gloves, hat, and umbrella, it is certain that he will soon be going out through the front door. Here, the Upanishad is explaining that the sense organs, meaning the sense capacities, are withdrawn into itself by the mind. Before the Udan lifts it from the dying body and guides it along to its next field of activity. The same is explained, the same idea is expounded in Gita chapter 15, verse 8. The description of the Udana as the external fire, apart from the above mentioned philosophical significance, has a plain and obvious truth in it which provides a complete similarity between the two. So long as Udana exists in the human form, the man is alive, and so long as the man is alive, there is a body warmth in him. When the Udana leaves, the heat alone is gone. The dead body is cold to the touch. Thus, we can say that a dead body is a thing in which the flames have died out or the fire has gone off. Mantra number 10. Yachittaste naisha pranamaayati pranastejasa yuktah sahatmana yatha sankalpitam lokan nayati. Whatever be his thoughts, accordingly he attends the prana, and the prana united with Udana, together with Jivatma, is led on to the world thought of. In the last Brahman, we are told that the mind withdrawing the senses into itself is guided by the Udana to its next field of activity, Loka. Certainly, a doubt would come as to who determines the next field. The Shastra goes into the problem exhaustively and makes conclusive statements. It says that the departing thoughts on the deathbed determine the future field of the ego center to function. This does not mean that we all can afford to live a thoughtless life of excesses and cruelties, all through and hoodwink the universal law by keeping to ourselves great and noble thoughts in the end. There are no trespassers wandering into truth. Never hope to smuggle yourself across the frontiers of the finite into the infinite. Eternal law is quite foolproof, and the devatas in charge of its execution are beyond all temptations. Nobody can thus smuggle himself into the greater domains in the evolutionary scheme. The last thought on the deathbed no longer depends upon our own independent willing and wishing, but is at that moment an irresistible declaration of the resultant of the entire thought life that we have been indulging in throughout our lives. To declare a profit and then more dividend, and therefore more dividend, is no doubt the sign of a great business success of the year. But no businessman would ever be unbusinesslike, thought out the year, and still expect to declare a large profit at the close of the year. The balance sheet at the end depends upon the individual business items undertaken. No one has any control over the final statement of accounts at the last moment. Just as profit is the resultant of the profits and losses. So too, at the time of death, the individual's last thought can only be determined by the resultant or the balance sheet of the entire thought life, good or bad, he has lived. Thus, if we dedicate all our life to earning and procuring, eating and breeding, certainly our parting thoughts can never be about any greater spiritual life or about moving towards a higher evolution, but they can only be about food and woman, money and deception, murder and loot, and as such, we are apt to be guided to a field wherein we can fulfill these demands without even the minimum unavoidable restraints that we have had to accept as men living in the modern town, at least for fear of the policeman. This idea of the last thought determining or giving an indication of the next life the man is to take is indicated in all our great textbooks. In Gita chapter 8 verse 6, there also it is endorsed that the last thoughts of a dying man determine his future incarnation. And to a large extent, this is the suggestion in all the religions of the world. Whether rebirth is considered therein explicitly or tacitly. Thus, the last thought determines and declares the exact life and destiny on the ego center prana is to live out in its next incarnation. The ego center, thus propelled by the Udana, is the Jivatma which is led to its next field of activity according to its own willing and desiring, determined and declared by, by itself with its last thought. The new world to which the ego center is directed need not necessarily mean that there are different worlds in the sense in which we understand the word. In Sanskrit, loka in its etymological content means only a field of experiences, maybe in the world of the animals or in the world of the flora or in the world of super sensuous enjoyment as heaven, etc. Mantra number 8. य एवं विद्वान् प्राणं वेद न हास्य प्रजा हीयन्ते मृतो भवति तदेष श्लोकः. The wise man who knows the prana thus will not have to suffer. His offsprings do not perish and he becomes immortal. There is the following verse. No method of upasana is generally advised in the Upanishads without giving the fruit thereof. This is mainly done in order to encourage the seekers to follow the path of upasana until they develop themselves, until they develop their powers of mental and intellectual perception. It serves as something like our modern days advertisement slogans for the methods of upasana. All possible desires of man have been classified under 3 headings by the Shastra: desire for offspring, desire for wealth, and desire for glory. Of them, the desire for offspring includes all relationships that exist in our social and domestic life. Here, the Rishi says that he who meditates upon the truth that one's own microcosmic form, with its activity centers, is but a miniature universe with its cosmic forces. In the will find macrocosm will find relationships in the world to be only intimate and many. This is to a large extent psychologically true, since the method of concentration suggested makes the practitioner expand in his mental and intellectual outlook. He thereby develops a large heart and a very cosmopolitan intellect, and these are certainly qualities which attract towards the individual the admiration, love, and regard for his fellow beings almost automatically and irresistibly. Even this particular statement regarding the benefits accrued by such a meditator is not Pippala's own idea, but he quotes the corresponding Rigveda mantra which clearly declares the same. The following is the mantra. Mantra number 12. उत्पत्तिमायतिं स्थानं विभुत्वं चैव पञ्चधा अध्यात्मं चैव प्राणस्य विज्ञायामृतमश्नुते इति. He who knows the origin, the entry, the seat, the fivefold distribution of the prana and the internal state in the body obtains immortality. Yes, he attains immortality. A Vedic mantra is quoted here by Rishi Pippalada in support of his conclusion contained in this Brahman. This mantra not only provides the Rishi with a very apt conclusion for the chapter, but also justifies the very Brahman Upanishad. The whole chapter deals with a detailed explanation of this mantra. He who knows. In Vedanta, knowing is not a merely intellectual appreciation or mental grasp of a theme, but means realizing thorough, through long and consistent meditation. When an individual comes to realize that the pranic centers in himself have corresponding realities in the cosmic form, he becomes immortal. This immortality is not relative. The individual thereby comes to experience his perfect identity with the total mind, the Hiranyagarbha, and remains one in identification of Himana with the Creator until the end of this creation cycle. Compared with the short and finite nature of the mortal, the state of the total mindhood, Hiranyagarbha Avastha, is certainly a state of immortality in a relative sense. Here ends the third Prashna. Query 4. Gargya and Pippalada. In the last chapter, we had a perfect analysis of the various centers of activities in the body And earlier we had found how the students inquired and completely ascertained the nature of the outer world and the nature of the body before they entered into a discussion over the powers within the body. Having thus wandered into the level of the prana, the steps of the inquiring intellect must enter the next interior hall within our personality or being to inspect and analyze it. In this question, the students seek and strive to understand the core of existence, the truth, which is the reality behind the individual and the cosmos. No other existing school of philosophy in the world today considers life so thoroughly in all its totality as Vedanta insists upon and pursues in its deliberations. All other philosophies examine and analyze only the experiences of the waking state and its world, and on the basis of these intelligent conclusions, they certainly draw great philosophical truths, but these must necessarily be incomplete since they constitute but a partial viewpoint. Life is not merely the experiences of the waking state. Every human being has got his quota of experiences in the dream state and in the deep sleep state also. Life in its totality must include the experiences of the waking, of the dream, and of the deep sleep states. And Vedanta is perhaps the only philosophy wherein they take a deep and consistent scientific interest in observing, analyzing, and codifying these experiences in their theories on the eternal truth. In the scientific process of thinking which we pursue in philosophy, a seeker hunting for the fundamentals of life must necessarily observe and comprehend life as a whole as a whole. Thus we had in the first three questions a thorough and complete discussion on the waking state, world constituted of the pluralistic phenomena, the body and the prana. The experiencer or the enjoyer of life is the subject, and the Vedanta student realized that in spite of a world of phenomenon ready to provide experiences, until the experiencer, the ego, comes in contact with the world of objects, no experience is caused. Life being a series of experiences, an inquiry into the nature of the ego center becomes unavoidable in any scientific analysis of life as such. Here, the disciple, warming himself up to the true spirit of discussion, is asking how exactly is the ego center functioning in man in the deep sleep state, etc. In this chapter, we get a thorough explanation of the seemingly different personalities in ourselves, experienced as the waker, the dreamer, and the deep sleeper. The whole discussion is round up by an inquiry into on what do all these depend. Mantra number 1. अथ हैनं सौर्यायणे गार्ग्यः पप्रच्छ भगवन्नेतस्मिन् पुरुषे कानि स्वपन्ति कान्यस्मिन् जाग्रति कतरेष देवस्वप्नान् पश्यति कस्यैतत् सुखं भवति कस्मिन् सर्वे सम्प्रतिष्ठिता भवन्तीति. Then Gargya, the grandson of Surya, questioned him, O Bhagavan, what are they that sleep in man? What again are awake? What is the Devata who sees the dream? Whose is this happiness? On what do all these depend? The question is so exhaustive that to grapple with it is to grapple with this entire chapter. But one thing that we may notice here at the very outset हरि ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरि ओम.